Welcome to the People's Forum.
From Congress or from the President in recognition of the theft of labor?
Yeah, I don't think reparations for something that happened 150 years ago for whom none of us currently living are responsible is a good idea. We've tried to deal with our original sin of slavery by fighting a civil war, by passing landmark civil rights legislation. We've elected an African-American president. I think we're always a work in progress in this country, but no one currently alive was responsible for that. And I don't think we should be trying to figure out how to compensate for it. First of all, it'd be pretty hard to figure out who to compensate. We've had waves of immigrants as well who've come to the country and experienced dramatic discrimination of one kind or another. So no, I don't think reparations are good.
Welcome back to the People's Forum. I'm your host, Kwame Innis. This is the 12th and final part of the 12-part series on reparations, whether or not African Americans, the ADOS population, is actually entitled to reparations. Directly to my left is my good friend, civil rights attorney, Royce Russell. Thank you, Royce.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, in the center is Dr. Stacie N.C. Grant, the founder of Destiny Designer University, international speaker and author.
Thank you for having me, Kwame.
Okay, and our good friend, my brother's very, very good friend, Robert Hornak, Republican and political consultant.
Thanks, Kwame, for having me.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. I'm glad you came today. Today is Juneteenth, June 19th. Mitch McConnell, you just saw him on the screen. I have to show respect. He's the Speaker of the House. He's the Senate Majority Leader. I'm sorry. He made a statement today that's going to lead us through this discussion. It was profound. Can I please see slide number 1 to let everybody know what this esteemed gentleman actually said? Okay, I'm going to throw the ground ball to you, Republican Mr. Hornak. What do you think about the Majority Leader? What do you think about what he said?
Well, look, this is a very difficult issue, and he was caught on the spot trying to answer something he probably wasn't really prepared to speak on. But let's
you said it wasn't after 40 years in the Senate. How could you not be prepared?
Well, this is an issue that has just suddenly bubbled to the surface of our political dialogue, really in recent weeks, because there's so many presidential candidates jumping on the bandwagon, making this part of their campaigns. This hasn't been a high-level public discussion, really, ever. But it's a worthwhile one to have. But the question is, how are we going to have it? How are we going to make this into a productive conversation? I think he was spinning a little bit, but technically he's right. This is an issue that was 150 years ago that we worked very hard as a country to get beyond, and we are at a point now where I think we are actually one of the freest, healthiest societies on the planet, in the history of the planet.
Well, let me just interject there. I think you mentioned a couple of things that's important. One is that he was caught off guard. Mm-hmm. That's unacceptable. You followed that up with a statement that this H.R. 40 has been in the air based upon the Democratic candidates that will be running for president. So his hand should be on the pulse, because that's what his leader, 45, is going to have to speak to at some point. So the fact that he was caught off guard is his fault. And the fact that he, without having any empathy, sympathy, or political savvy to say, I need to address that at another time, that is up for further discussion. He laid out his position with no real substance behind it, except for, which we've heard so many times, which is also unacceptable, is that we discussed that a long time ago and no one is alive. No one is alive.
As if the statute of limitations on these crimes has run out.
Right.
The last time I checked, there was no statute of limitations on murder.
And I agree.
No, not for other communities.
That's right. And I agree with you when you say that this was something that was discussed way back when, over 250 years ago, 150 years ago. The problem is that it was discussed. It was never resolved. And so now we need to get to resolution. The discussion and resolution is two different things. And the time frame between the first discussion, the second discussion, and the third discussion has been centuries. Centuries. Mm-hmm.
And that it's not something that has been in the political discourse, I don't think is actually fair to say, because there have been many people who have raised this as an issue, and then for him to say, and we elected an African-American president, as if that erased all of what has happened to us and what is due us, and the systematic ways in which we still are suffering because of lack of the acknowledgement. And I think in the way he said it, to Mr. Russell's point, it could have been said in a different way if he needed more time, but there was no empathy in that statement to even say, maybe this is something that requires a little bit more time for me to do some more research on. But just to give that in the spur of the moment, in the position he holds, I don't think he has that luxury.
Well, look, the proposal that they're talking about isn't even a proposal. It's a proposal to discuss more.
But that makes it even more comical, because for the last 40 years, remember, John Conyers was the first one to introduce this. He subsequently retired under a cloud. Representative Jackson picks it up, introduces it again, to have a discussion, 40 years to have a discussion about something that started, they say 1619? I say 1555, but 1619 is when they want to start. Fine, I'll start
take
there.
it from there.
You know, we cannot be talking about having a discussion for 4 decades.
And one of the things that when you really do a critical analysis on his brief statement, right? Because I'm really into critical thinking and profound protest, right? So let's do a critical analysis of his statement. What he tries to do, unsuccessfully, is try to put the solution before the problem. Well, how are we going to take care of this? Who are we going to pay? That's not the question. We haven't gotten to that part. That's like saying, I want to build a waterfront. All right, let's find the land. Not, I want to build a waterfront. Where are the taxes? How tall is the building going to be?
Who's going to live there?
Right, who's going to live there? So, once again, I think he failed at that, but we're here today to discuss that. And hopefully all Americans will be discussing it, because it's a topic for discussion. Exactly.
For those of you who don't know what H.R. 40 looks like, please put it on the screen, number 2. This legislation, and thankfully I have to give some credit to Senator Booker, because he didn't sit on his hands like Senator Scott and not say anything. He actually, brought it to the Senate to actually have them, vote on it possibly. This thing has to be done. You cannot spend 40 years to have a committee to research whether or not we can even talk about it. Because that doesn't make any sense. And I think everybody's being disingenuous. You have a lot of really, really smart people. Today, they have a hearing, and instead of having, and this is no slight to Ta-Nehisi Coates, no slight to Danny Glover, no slight to any of the other people that testified today, but why didn't the leading economists in this country, the guys who play with these numbers all day long, the structural economists, why didn't they show up? Why weren't they allowed to show up? You know why they didn't want them to show up? Dr. Sandy Darity of Duke University, who's been writing about this thing along with our fraternity brother Derek Hamilton and a host of others, they have an entire plan written up, but they can't get in the chair to sit in front of the committee. You know why? Because the committee is always run by those in power, and they don't want to hear it.
And there's this phenomenon that we suffer in America, and we can take it from policing, we could take it to housing, we could take it to bare-knuckle politics in this arena, and that is talking around the subject matter, right? So what we saw today, great effort, but it was a talking around the subject matter. talking to the subject matter is bringing the economist in, bringing the statistician in, bringing someone in that can say, yes, the argument has always been throughout time. And I'm just looking in your direction because you're here. I'm not facing and putting it on your plate, because when you look at the history, when you look at Republicans, when you look at 1818 and 1864 and 1862, after many of the wars, the Republicans stood to the forefront and said, you know what? Let's get this land. Let's have the army, let's borrow this mule and let's get this moving. And it didn't happen.
It did happen. General Sherman
that's right.
actually had the program working for 6 months in the coastal islands of South Carolina and Georgia. Johnson takes over for Abraham Lincoln
and it goes
and puts the kibosh on it immediately. Right. We're not going to give them anything.
Right.
So imagine your parents kick you out. You have no food, you have no clothing, but the clothing on your back. You have no shelter, you have no money, you cannot read, you cannot write, you have no resources. But you're being told to leave here now and pull yourself up by your bootstraps because you're being given the opportunity, you're in the greatest country in the world, and you'll be all right. Just work hard. As a matter of fact, you know what? You know we're against you. Just work twice as hard as everybody else, and it'll be all right. Answer, that does not close the racial wealth gap.
No, it doesn't. And look, I don't think it's putting the cart before the horse to say, we need to have some understanding of what this is going to look like. Who's going to pay? How is the payment going to be made? What form is it going to take? These are, we could sit here and talk about Mitch McConnell's faux pas for the next 30 minutes. It's not going to make this a very interesting show. What we should be talking about is, what are we going to do to better the lives of people in this country who have been historically disadvantaged?
Okay, I want to ask Dr. Grant a question, because you just said something that I find, to be amazing. Who we are going to pay? We have had a census in this country since 1790. We know exactly who to pay.
Who?
It's on the census. The people who were marked as African-American slave on the census. It's at the Library of Congress. It's not hidden. Dr.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that we really need to look at when you say who we're going to pay, that is a little comical to me as well, because when we look at the disenfranchised, we know who they are and we know the programs and resources that are needed, and that there is no equity across our country on what kind of resources in education, in housing, in any of the areas that they can excel. The resources, the money is not put there. So we just start on a base level of education and the access to education, what that looks like, and how some communities have children who can build 3D images in kindergarten, where others are not even at reading level when they are in 2nd grade. So their money can be placed, and we have the money and the ability to do it, but we don't see it as an urgent priority. And that's the systematic way in which we continue the challenge.
Well, one of the things to add on to what Dr. Grant has stated is that it simplifies and it does a discussion of a drastic tragedy and harm to simplify to who we're going to pay. This is not Japanese being put in a camp where we can say there's a finite group of people, we did this one act and we're going to pay for this one act that we did. We're talking about over centuries of harm that is done. So it is not going to be who we're going to pay, not one person. But it could be that, and because we didn't do it so many years ago doesn't mean that we can't do it now. But I would say it's not only who we're going to pay, as you said, what areas we're going to give resources to financially, whether it's housing, education, healthcare. Hey, give a lump sum money to the HBCs. There we go, historically black colleges. That is a payment. That is institutional payment. That is not a person. The argument that slaves or descendants of slaves no longer exist, so how do we decipher who's who? That's a lost leader.
That's a shell
That's
game.
a lost leader.
We actually have to go to break right now. When we come back, we're going to open this discussion back up with who we're going to pay. Coming back at you. okay, when we left off, the question was, who are we going to pay? That everybody is dead. It was 150 years ago. Nobody's left. Nobody even knows who those people are. They were, you know, they walked off the plantations, you know, all over the South, and they got lost. We don't know who they are. What do you say in response to that?
Well, you know, I'm really glad that Stacie brought up the idea of education being a vehicle for this, because that, I think, is something that would actually be really acceptable to a lot of people if it were framed that way. Look, I'm a believer that people should have the freedom to choose where they and how they educate their children. I would be very willing to entertain a program where we gave kids in poor black communities all over this country vouchers, if from, we'll pick a grade, 8th grade down to 1, so that we're actually not just, you know, giving away lumps of money, but we're actually investing in the future of this country and trying to rebuild what was lost. If we gave those kids vouchers, then they could have access to a lot of those things that you were talking about.
It's more than just vouchers, which on the surface it sounds awesome, like, oh my goodness, we're going to give vouchers to these children who haven't had resources. It's more than just the vouchers, it's the educational system to be taught properly on the injustice that was done to a whole population that built this country, not just 2 or 3 lines in a textbook that explains Harriet Tubman or talks about Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. and now adding President Barack Obama. There's more to who we are that should be learned, just as we learned about the atrocities that have happened to other cultures and other communities. We need to learn that across the board because that's American history. So the vouchers are just a piece of the conversation to say resources need to go to a community so they can learn the same level of information, same access to technology, to new trends, but we need to start in the textbook and correcting the information that's there.
Doc, can I ask a legal question to Royce? Have you ever seen a phenomenon where the perpetrator, the convicted felon, gets to tell the victim exactly what kind of restitution they'd like to make?
So not only that, the defendant, being the United States, gets a chance to tell the prosecutor, being folks of African descent, well, how am I serve my time? As a matter of fact, I want to serve my time in the Cayman Islands. I don't want to serve my time in prison. I want to serve my time in Jamaica. I don't want to serve my time in prison. The defendant doesn't have that right. The defendant is stripped from their right. So what we find in America today, part of reparation is saying I did something wrong. See, in America doesn't want to say they did something wrong, and they don't want to say that I've done something wrong over centuries, but they can easily point the finger at West Germany. They can easily point the finger at other countries and say, you did this wrong. We hold the moral ground. You need to do something about it.
Being fair, I want to help Robert out. Former President 44, Barack Obama, did actually go over to the door of no return and actually hold his head down and shed a tear and said, this was a great injustice.
No, a president, a president speaking for a country doesn't make it all well and good. And, as a matter of fact, reparations should hurt. Like, you know, this is an idea that I would go for. I would go for giving kids. No, it's not an idea. Reparations is going to be painful. Slavery was painful.
Exactly.
The domino effect of redlining was painful.
Yes.
The domino effect of, quote unquote, fair housing when you didn't get fair housing. Look, we know wealth is built from owning property.
Exactly.
If I don't own any property, I can't establish wealth. If I have to spend all my money because I can't get a mortgage and I'm into buying a contract like most of the people that migrated from the South to the Midwest to Chicago and places like that to run away from terrorism, to get some type of protection, bought into the American dream, wind up contracting their house because they couldn't get a mortgage. Now they're spending all their resources on trying to preserve that house. That means no resources are being spent on education. No resources are being spent on nutrition. Therefore, the outlook of their kids is very, very bleak because we know they're tied together. That is a domino effect of slavery.
Exactly.
That's a domino effect. That is traceable.
Of systematic, governmental, sponsored discrimination and slavery. I need to ask a question, and this question is for you, Robert.
Go ahead.
This question is for you. If the wealth in America is owned 98% by a dominant group, 98%, and we're going to use that because that's what the statistics say. Department of Labor, you know, all of these fancy government offices. 98%. The wealth gap. White Americans have 10 times the amount of wealth as black Americans. Despite education, a black person with a PhD has less wealth than a white high school dropout. How?
There's no simple answer to that question. I can't.
No, there's a simple answer.
No, there's not a simple answer. This is not, I'm sorry. You know, dare I say it, this is not all black and white. But you're glossing over a point that I made earlier in this conversation, which is who's going to pay. And the fact is that we were talking during the break about the fact that there's slavery going on in many countries around the world. Today, this is a problem that has been around for centuries.
I'm not cutting you off. I just want to put up the slide number 4 because you mentioned who's going to pay.
Yeah.
So this slide directly deals with payments made by America and their sister and brother nations all over the world. But go ahead.
Royce is talking like it should hurt people who did nothing to institute that institution.
They did nothing but benefit. Well, if I stand there while a poor woman
failure to intervene, failure to intervene, and I want to put it. I want to put in the intervention was stop slavery. That was the intervention. But
no, but
let's put it. But that's what he's referring to. We intervened because there was it was Emancipation Proclamation. That's not intervention. That is righting a wrong on a physical legislative nature. But let's talk about all the legislation that came from there. And when I say it's going to hurt people, when I mean people, I mean the American people. The American people is going to hurt, and it should hurt because it's a hurting part of our history. It's a part that we have to get past. Look, it hurt Wells Fargo when they had to pay close to $175 million because they were still doing the same thing that was done in 1870.
People living today are not Wells Fargo. They're not the people that committed the crime.
So that means what should happen is that there should be no civil rights, false arrest, police brutality litigation because taxpayers are paying for that money, even though the police officer commit the crime. Is that what you're saying?
No, what I'm saying is you're talking about people as if they're currently engaged in the process of that took place.
They are currently engaged. If you get a kid that graduates from Kenan University, a C+ student, he comes out, he's making $120,000. You get an African American Latino kid who goes to Fordham University, goes to Cornell, and can't find a job. What are you talking about?
Are you asking for reparations for slavery, or are you asking for reparations for current discrimination?
But that is a product.
But it's okay.
You cannot separate.
You can't separate the two because that's saying so. Every young African American who commits a crime or does something that is not a great choice, they shouldn't be blamed for that. Is what you're saying, that because they're not the ones who committed maybe being enslaved, but they're the product of it. But we shouldn't worry about that because it's not their fault.
No, I'm not saying that we shouldn't hold somebody who takes a gun and walks into a store and holds up the store owner.
But why are they doing it?
Accountable. I know it's kind of abstract, but we're holding America accountable.
Right.
I'm not going to Robert and saying, "Hey, Robert, you know what? You know, even though you weren't part of slavery, we have to dig in your wallet right now and go right." And when you frame it that way, of course, everyone is anti that. It is America. It wasn't framed. Look, when America, like I said, put the Japanese into camps, no one asked who was going to pay. America paid. Exactly. Why is it when it comes to people of color, in particular African Americans, we have to now ask the question of who is going to pay?
Royce, let me give everybody a chance to close out. We're getting ready to wrap up. Robert, 20 seconds. Final word.
This is a very complex issue. There's no easy answer. We'd like to find ways to make everybody's life better in this country, but reparations is not the solution.
Dr. Grant?
We have to continue to have conversation and discourse that will lead us to a solution for what has been done to a people for over 400 years, and reparations is the beginning of the conversation.
Thank God that African Americans and Latinos are now in a place and time where economically and politically they are astute enough and they're in a position of power so that this conversation comes to the forefront. And I think the toughest part about reparation is the actual apology.
Well, I think, lastly, the actual apology, redress. We need land, we need institutions, we need a sovereign status, we need a protected status. We need something like the Department of the Interior that the American Indians got to protect us. But of all, we need federal support in perpetuity. Good night, everybody. Kwame Innis, People's Forum. Thank you for this hot debate.
We are demanding recoupment. Recoupment of our birthright with compound interest over the years of oppression and exploitation. We're demanding recoupment of earnings that were never paid. The initial demand of this recoupment is, as a start, $6 billion. $6 billion for the creation of a black urban coalition.